So thank you so much to the Center for Middle East Studies and AIMS for your kind invitation today. I wanted to start with a theoretical rubric, theoretical question. And my thought is this. We begin with the premise that the body is the precondition of human sovereignty. The body is the base of the body politic. And we can see this through medicine. So let me show you what I mean. The talk is taken from my book, I don't hope this is sufficiently shameless, Medicine and the Saints, a history of medicine and public health in Morocco. And this book was inspired, you might say, because I got sick in Morocco in 1995 when I was studying Arabic and living with a family in Fez, which I hope the students here will all consider doing as well, except the getting sick part. And the mother of the family treated me with traditional medicine. And this raised for me a number of questions. So first is the question of medical pluralism and medical syncretism, or why patients shop between different medical systems and mix medicines for cure. Why does this happen and what does it mean? Moroccan traditional medicine is largely Galenic, and this is a Galenic pharmacy here. But it also involves visiting saint shrines for healing. And in this talk, we focus on this saint healing, not Galenic medicine. So how and why do Islamic saints heal people? And third, the first biomedical system to interact with saint healing in Morocco was the French Protectorate Health Service during French rule, which was 1912 to 1956. What does medicine tell us about colonialism? How it affects the body, the polity, the individual, and healing. And finally, why are these saints political? Sufi saint shrines are now under attack by Islamic positivists, so-called Salafi Islamist groups. These Salafis seek to redefine the Islamic body politic by destroying Sufi shrines in Tunisia, attacking the mausoleum of 333 saints in Timbuktu in Mali, and especially by burning manuscripts, the Islamic knowledge of the 14th and 15th centuries. Why? In Libya, the body of a saint was actually dug up and stolen from his grave in Mistra, Libya. So why is the body of a dead saint so threatening? Notice that this destruction revolves around two elements. Epistemology, so here the study, the destruction of knowledge, the destruction of manuscripts, and the body. It is not, as the media would suggest, a simple puritanical intolerance. It is a war to define the nature of truth, knowledge, and thus the Islamic body politic. It is a political battle being fought in and through the human body. And in fact, when we consider the Arab Spring, we see bodies, multiple examples of human bodies as the forum for political debate. And not just the dead body as witness, when the bodies of Syrian children were laid out to bear witness against the Assad regime, nor the body as a political symbol when the statues of Gaddafi and Ben Ali were pulled down and dismembered by crowds. More, we see corporeal politics demonstrating that the body and the body politic are intertwined. They reproduce each other. As anthropologist Jean Komaroff has argued, the human body and the body politic are mutually constitutive. New political communities mobilize themselves around images of the brutalized corpses of the child Hamza al-Khatib in Syria. So a couple of things to think about. Hamza al-Khatib was, I'm sure many of you know, but if everyone doesn't know, was a 13-year-old child who was basically scooped up by the Syrian police during a protest of some students and tortured to death. His body was mutilated, he was shot, his penis was hacked off, and his bloated corpse was released back to his parents. and extremely disfigured, and demonstrated that he had gone through considerable torture. And in many ways, this event helped to spark the Syrian revolution. People thought, well, if they do this to a child, you know, what else is left? What have we got to lose? We're at the end. But what's interesting after that, too, is that protest movement mobilized around this child and his body, and you frequently see the image of him alive and dead, and that people say, we are all Hamza al-Khatib. So what is Syria? What is Syria? Syria is not the state of Bashar al-Assad. Syria is, we are all Hamza al-Khatib. Who is Syria? Who are we? We are all Hamza al-Khatib. And we identify through this body. And you see that the Syrian people are represented corporeally. So this is a poster, a political poster, in which Hamza al-Khatib is portrayed not just as a martyr, but as the embodiment of the body politic and the Syrian people back, you know, taking revenge on Assad, you know, reaching out for him. He's this small figure running away, and here comes the Syrian people reaching for him. And so powerful was this child and the symbol of his body that the regime actually shelled his grave. This is a picture of his tombstone, which has been bombarded by the state. And the same thing happened with Khalid Said, this young man who had basically been beaten to death in broad daylight by the Egyptian police. And this Facebook group said, we are all Khalid Said. Again, a political mobilization around the body, around the corpse of this one man, the sense of collective identity and vulnerability. Also the picture of him alive and dead. And also Khalid Said being used as the representation of the electorate. And this is even an electoral poster saying, here comes the election. And then he also is holding Mubarak, although we know kind of the sad turn of events in both of those stories after this. We also find citizens speaking through their bodies. So the Tunisian Mohamed Bouazizi burned his own body before the presidential palace to indict a regime incapable of providing food, work, housing, incapable of supporting the citizens' physical survival. Egyptians have been determined to occupy the metaphorical national public square by physically occupying Tahrir Square. They face the prospect of being shot to sit in a public park. Even the dead are not exempt. Opponents of Gaddafi's regime dug up the bones of Gaddafi's mother from the family crypt and burned them. Why? Because human sovereignty exists in and through the body. The body is the base of the body politic. Why don't we see this? Or more precisely, why can't we see this? As Bruno Latour argues, we flee the body so we can imagine ourselves as free citizen subjects, free to make our own societies and control our own destinies. Western modernity is, by definition, the divorce of the social from the biological. But the liberal modern citizen is a fallacy, a collection of legal rights entirely abstracted from the body. The citizen has a right to equal protection under the law, but no right to work, or to eat, or to medical care. No right to live, in fact. This liberal model of sovereignty, invented in the West and adopted by nationalists in North Africa and the Middle East, is in crisis, not only in the Middle East, but perhaps in the United States as well. But despite its manifest failures, it is difficult to see beyond the liberal model of freedom, or to imagine polities and sovereignty in a different way. A place to begin is with bodies. They are repositories for epistemologies and politics that defy a modern scientific understanding. They suggest a reality outside our frame of vision. In 1999, I interviewed a 95-year-old Moroccan lady in the city of Fez, who explained to me that God's election and her blood descent from the Prophet Muhammad gave her barakah, God's blessing, which allowed her to deliver babies, heal the sick, and preserved her from illness. At the same time, she described falling down with typhus fever in the 1940s and showed me the milky cataracts spreading in her eyes. The paradox of a body at once biological and spiritual, healthy and sick, suggests different and layered epistemologies, different ways of knowing. It is precisely here, with bodies and healing that don't make sense, that we should look for history and politics. If it sounds like I am suggesting a connection between a 95-year-old grandma with cataracts and Salafi Islamists blowing up a Sufi shrine, that is exactly what I am suggesting. Both are individual engagements with history, both are products of history, the internalization of an epistemological, colonial, and political war to define the human being. To see how this perspective expands our thinking, today I excavate the ideal of a Sufi body politic that existed in Morocco before colonialism, a way of knowing that survives today as fragments of healing narratives. A pre-colonial Sufi polity is difficult to imagine in the modern world, where the fighting saints, like the Mahdi of Sudan, were replaced by Islamic modernizers, men in suits who created progress by reconciling Islam with the positive science of the West. But if we combine sources and methodologies that don't usually go together, oral history, medical fieldwork, Sufi hagiography, and colonial archives, alternate ways of knowing become visible. This Sufi polity disappeared as a result of French colonialism and Moroccan modernist nationalism, but the political liberal citizen used to replace it is in crisis. By way of conclusion, we will consider modern Islamist thinkers who have attempted a reintegration of the body to the body politic, and what a history of healing in Morocco provides for understanding the contemporary politics of the Arab world. So we begin with a hagiographical narrative, a type familiar to scholars of Sufism. In the year 1623 AD, after a failed revolt against the Sultan Abdullah II, the city of Fez feared his vengeance and sent two mad saints, Majnun, to intercede on its behalf. When he received the two emissaries, the Sultan scoffed. The people of Fez couldn't find any to mediate for them but these two shitters in their rags. Angry, the saints replied, "By God, you will not have a free hand in Fez for 41 years, and departed. Suddenly, the Sultan's stomach reversed, and he vomited feces from his mouth for several days, until he sent for the saints and begged their pardon. No Sultan ruled in Fez for the period the saint had predicted, until God brought the Alawid Sultan Rashid. And this story is true," concludes the court historian al-Ifrani, "for I heard it from many people, and I summarize what was told to us." This is the Islamic saint in Morocco, the wali, which means the friend of God, people of God's right hand, also called murabbit, he who connects or binds, in French corrupted to marabout. The translation of wali as saint comes from French people visiting North Africa in the 19th century, who observed Muslim pilgrims visiting Moroccan Islamic awliya for healing from a variety of physical, mental, and social afflictions, touching their bodies, swallowing their saliva, sleeping in their tombs, and performing healing at the shrines. So for example, the Sidi Harazim, or Hirizim is the original name, near Fez, which is a darih, which is on top of mineral water that pilgrims still drink for relief from kidney stones. It has mineralization, and you can visit it today, and also there's more to say about this we can discuss. But I wanted to add a new dimension to our understanding of the wali. He was also a public healer, a healer who brings wholeness simultaneously to human bodies and to society, a concept from historians of Africa. Saints heal through their knowledge of God, their ma'rifah, by seeing the reality of the human body as the meeting place of divine and material worlds, an isthmus between the oceans of God and the cosmos. The Quran describes the human body as a location for God's signs and the locus of the manifestation of God's names and attributes. The body belongs to God and will testify to him against the soul on the day of judgment. So one day, God's enemies will be ushered toward the fire, distraught and bewildered. As they approach it, their hearing and vision and skin bear witness against them, revealing what they had been doing. They address their skins. How can you bear witness against us? They answer, God has caused us to speak, as God causes all things to speak. For God created you in the first instance, and you return inevitably to God. The Quran also tells us, that day shall we set a seal on their mouths, but their hands will speak to us, and their feet bear witness to all that they did. In his work, The Divine System for the Reform of the Human Kingdom, Sufi scholar Ibn al-Arabi describes the relationship of the body to the body politic. As God appointed the human soul to be his vice-regent on earth, so God created the human body as a citadel for its residence. As a just ruler produces a harmonious city, so a just soul produces a harmonious body. An unjust soul will provoke the body to revolt. So it was that in 1623, the stomach of Sultan Abdullah II testified to God, rising against tyranny in the two citadels, the city of Fez and his own person. This illuminates how Muslim sainthood became political leadership. Miracle-working saints like the Almoravids and the Almohads have fought the sultans for power, waged war, created states, collected taxes, and negotiated trade agreements. The saint-sultan tensions of Moroccan history arise from the dual nature of Moroccan leadership. From Vincent Cornell, a limited worldly sultanate and a continuous spiritual imamate. This direct knowledge of God came to different people at different times, women, beggars, sultans, physicians, craftsmen, knowledge that manifested as miracles, healing, flying in the air, and revealing the unseen world. The Moroccan public validated these Islamic saints by acknowledging their miracles and visiting their bodies in life and after death. And the saint's body is an opening to God in the world. So unlike the Christian rejection of the flesh, the Muslim body can be a vessel for God's presence. Nothing draws my servant near to me like the performance of what I prescribe for him as religious duty. Then my servant continues to draw nearer to me by supererogatory acts until I love him, so that when I love him, I become the ear by which he hears, his eye by which he sees, his hand by which he grasps, and the foot by which he walks. Thus, by me he hears, by me he sees, by me he grasps, and by me he walks. If he asks me for something, I certainly give it, and if he seeks refuge with me, indeed I protect him. Pilgrims touch saints' bodies for healing because the wali's body was an opening to God in the world. At the same time, Moroccans used saints to construct and remember history and to give political legitimacy. Moroccans used saints to live the Islamic polity as a geopolitical moral body. We consider this through shrine politics, healing narratives, and the city of Fez. So geographically, the saints literally anchored a floating map of history in the Moroccan landscape through their bodies. As Christian pilgrims might read the Bible in the stained glass pictograms of cathedrals, so Moroccans read a history of God's presence in the world by visiting the graves of his saints. In pilgrimage, Moroccans connected discrete moments in historical time into a topographical map of the past, a public history that the sultans tried to manipulate by building and destroying shrines on saint graves. And to illustrate, we consider a short history of the graves of Idris I and Idris II. The grave of the founder of the Islamic State in Morocco, Idris I, became a rallying cry for the political ambitions of his descendants, the Idrisid dynasty. The Idrisids lost power in 921 to Berber dynasties like the Marinids, who had no blood tie to the Prophet and thus an insecure claim to power. Trying to force the people to forget the Idrisids, the Marinid Sultan Uthman II used his armies to chase pilgrims from Idris's grave. As a court historian recounted, Idris, may God be pleased with him, was buried outside the gate of Walili, and the people have been determined to visit his tomb. There they cry out their needs to God and are heard. His body appeared in its shroud in the year 718 Hijri, so people streamed to it from every part of the Maghrib, causing fears of a riot. Our Lord, Abu Sa'id Uthman bin Yaqub bin Abdul Haq, may God accept his deeds, sent an army to drive them away from that place and to build an end to the disturbances. To build their own legitimacy, the Marinids discovered the corpse of his son, Idris II, miraculously untouched by decay, which they reburied in a magnificent shrine in the city of Fez. This shrine became a center of visitation, and Idris II, or Moulay Idris, the patron saint of Fez. So you have also, here's Idris, the Idrisid Mosque, and the Qarawin and Fez, which is so great. So despite the Sultan's efforts, the Moroccan people used the saints to construct history for themselves. Oral traditions across Morocco recount that as the Idrisids fell from power, an Idrisid child fled to their region and found refuge with a local family. Over time, the family all became known as saints. As a French ethnographer recorded at the time of the persecution of the Idrisids by Musa ibn Abi al-Afia in 317, a Sharif Idrisi who was still a child, pursued by enemy soldiers who wanted to kill him, took refuge in the house of a Baqal of the Ghazawa. Summoned by the pursuers to hand over the young Sharif, the Baqal, to save a descendant of the Prophet, gave one of his own sons to the soldiers. Later, after the persecution of the Idrisids ended, the Baqal revealed to the Sharif, whom he raised with his own sons, his real origin. The Awlad al-Baqal quickly became the object of veneration of all the people of the country. This story reveals a merging of the human body and the polity in a tree branching from Fez to Moroccan cities and tribes, bringing the Prophet's authority to local lineages. The tree is an image of the Sufi chain of spiritual authority, but the people use the generative physical body of Idris II to join the Sufi tree of knowing with the Prophet's family tree. And an actual tree grows from the grave of Idrisid and axial saint Abd Salam ibn Mshish, a literal and metaphorical expression of his spiritual power. So, how does all of this become healing practice? I want to share with you a set of interviews I did in a state clinic in Fez in 1999. I spoke with 4 elderly gentlemen, all residents of the Lumti neighborhood in Fez. After a rousing critique of today's health service, one man volunteered that his family cures bouzaloum, a shooting pain from the base of the spine down the leg caused by a blocked artery in the leg or a constriction of the intestines. He said, "We have an illness because we are shurafa, and our ancestor is Sidi Yahya, the son of this Mullah Idris. He is our ancestor, and we have a wahmi illness. They call it bouzaloum. We cure it. It strikes here, in this joint here. To treat bouzaloum, the patient must visit the tomb of Sidi Yahya in the Sanhaja region and consult one of his descendants from the Azami tribe. Each patient has his plant in the open countryside, which lights up the night like burning embers to the Azami, who mark it with ashes or wheat chaff. The next day, the Azami return to the plant and cut its stem, cutting the vein for the patient. At dawn, we get up and go out to that plant. We spend the night with it. We say we are going to cut bouzaloum by means of it, to so-and-so, for example. We put that plant in front of us and we read al-Fatiha over it to the end of the verse. Then we say, I cut it for so-and-so, son of your mother's name, and they cut that stem with a knife, and he is cured by the permission of God. When I inquired why the Azami are able to cure this pain, the answer was a history of the early Islamic state in Morocco. Why does that thing work? What do you mean? What is the means? How does it work? That baraka, our grandfather, he is Sidi Yahya, the son of Mullah Idris, because Mullah Idris II left 12 sons. It is a historical question. When the rule of the Idrisids disappeared, the Idrisids began to escape. Our ancestor came, escaped to this area, here to the region of Taounet, to one mountain. There he lived, there he had children. There is still a tribe, how big? Big. It is called the Shurafa Azamiyin. I began to see the body as an archive, the repository of history, of a lost form of political authority. In this cure, the patient experiences God's mercy, and his individual story is linked to the larger history of Morocco. The sufferer is connected to the Prophet Muhammad through his descendants and to a place, Tawanet Mountain, which is a physical projection of the saint's soul. The cure integrates realities otherwise fragmented for the patient in temporal life: politics, geography, history, the soul, and God. But I also wondered, how does a person become a place? How did Tawanet Mountain become an opening to God? To understand how saints operated in a place, I turned to the city of Fez and a 19th-century 3-volume hagiographical compendium of the Moroccan scholar Muhammad ibn Ja'far al-Kattani, Kitab, salwat al-anfas, muhadathat al-akyas, biman uqbira min al-ulama wa al-sulaha bifez. Read with contemporary healing narratives, the salwa shows how the saints affirmed God's law simultaneously in the city and the person, opening a door between the divine and material worlds with the key of knowledge. In al-Kattani's text, the saints teach the people social virtue and mediate the city's ecosystem, causing rain to fall and plants to spring from the earth. Without the saints and scholars, afflictions would flow forth onto the people of the earth like an inundation, and the people would be blind like beasts. Science, ilm, was born in Medina, raised in Mecca, ground to flour in Egypt, and sifted in Fez. This knowing began with Idris II, a Mohammedan figure who called upon God to make Fez a house of science and law, the recitation of your book, and may she uphold your limits, and may her people be faithful adherents of the Sunnah. Mullah Idris himself merges literally with the city space. His buried body is like the beating heart of the city, and the canals of the river Fez become his circulatory system. A Fez resident told me that when he put his legs into the pool of water at the Bu'inaniya Madrasa, Barakah from Idris II cured him of typhus. And it works very quickly, like magic, and my Lord gives me life, and here I am standing up, my daughter. A French physician in the 1930s recorded a cure at the tiny water spout projecting from the wall of the Mullah Idris shrine. An inscription in Kufic characters engraved on the cup indicates that the fountain is a habus property of Mullah Idris. The patient takes the cup with the right hand, says, "In the name of God," drinks 3 swallows of water and thanks God. Then he recites, "May the barakah of this water of venerated Mullah Idris expand in me. May God accord it to me, cure me, and give me good health. May the will of God be done, of God the healer." The patient lights an olive oil lamp next to the fountain called Manara. If the patient can't be transported, his family takes a bottle of water from Bab Lufa, which he drinks, then rubs the area of his body where the problem is. So now Bab Lufa is closed, it's behind this brown door, but there's still this calligraphy over the door. Drink here and wrath disappears, becomes skilled by the name of God in visitation and prayer. If we look at Fez over time, the urban space resembles an organic being, growing and changing with the souls buried in its streets. A buried saint body may grow into a shrine, a mosque, a Sufi lodge, or an entire city quarter. The body of Sidi Ahmed al-Shawi has become a city quarter. Sidi al-Hayat is a community mosque. The Salwa describes the city of Fez in a revolving spiral, a pilgrimage route that begins at the grave of Idris II and revolves through the city neighborhoods. This is my mastery of PowerPoint. Idris II is the literal Qutb, the literal spiritual, geographic, and cosmological axis connecting earth to heaven, around whom the city literally turns. The Salwa is thus organized according to a different cartographic imaginary than this French map. It is a world organized by the spiritual energy of the saints. Al-Kattani writes of the saints as doors to God on earth and their bodies as openings in the skin of reality. As social agents in the Salwa, the awliya show the people how to live the saying of the Prophet, "God the highest said, loving me requires love of each other. Loving me requires cooperation. Loving me requires advising each other." The saints invite the people to righteousness and punish evildoers, usually within their own bodies. If a criminal approaches the grave of a saint, he finds the body part used to perform evil acts streaked with black lines. Blindness, vomiting, and pain struck the killer who tried to attack refugees in the shrine of al-Lamti. It is God who punishes, but the wali acts as the voice for his will. What I have tried to show is not reality, or even how it was, but an idea of how it was, a pre-colonial way of constructing the past, imagining the polity, and living sovereignty within the body. Historians of Africa have shown many ways of knowing the past. They ask us to experience all of these representations of reality as realities. What emerges is an ideal of Fez as a polity, a Sufi version of the city of virtue of the Medina al-Fadila. Here the Sultan has limited authority. He is the people's executor, not their sovereign. But this Sufi polity was challenged in the early 20th century when a Moroccan Sultan, his court officials, and legal scholars considered a different idea of truth. The court adopted Islamic modernism, or Salafia philosophy, a movement of the late 19th century to reconcile Islam with French positivism. So what is positivism? Take a quick trip to 19th century France. Sorry. So Auguste Comte, father of positivism and author of Cours de philosophie positive, was not an imperialist. But in the Third Republic, imperialists all called themselves Comteans, like Prime Minister Jules Ferry and Ernst Renan, who declared in 1883 that Islam had killed science. In killing science, he wrote, Islam killed itself and condemned itself to a complete inferiority in the world. So Comte was not an imperialist, but he created a single epistemological system that negated other kinds of knowing. Comte imagined the physical and the moral as levels of a single system, one that obeyed natural law from the simplest to the most complex order of reality. So from mathematics to geometry to chemistry to biology, every science builds on the one that came before, and they all obey the laws of that which comes before, and the ultimate science is sociology, which is the most complex, but then which also obeys all of the laws of all the sciences that come before. People evolve through history to an awareness of this fact. Thus, a society's approach to the physical world demonstrated its degree of cultural progress. A people matured through the sciences. First, chemistry replaces alchemy, and astronomy, astrology, until finally sociology replaces religion. In a word, Comte wrote, humanity definitively substitutes herself for God, without ever forgetting his provisional services. Comte reduced religion to social phenomena and subverted the human being to the laws of nature. The form of positivism applied in Morocco was Durkheimian sociology through the first Arabist editor of L'Année Sociologique, Edmond Dutey, whom the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs sent on 5 secret missions to Morocco between 1900 and 1907 to scout things out and provide a plan for the conquest and rule of Morocco. Analyzing the array of saints and pretenders to the throne, Dutey argued that Moroccans were primitives, inhabiting a magical universe of demons, emotional projections of the savage mind. The Islamic saint was a human fetish, like the gree-gree of the African witch doctor. His healing was nothing more but transference by magic. As the primitive rubbed a rock on his body to capture the illness, so the saint's purpose was to absorb the tribe's maladies into his own body. And this is a kerkour, an example also of this. So you rubbing the ill place with a rock, trapping the illness in the rock, and then so he took that as an example and proof of this theory. Sainthood itself was a kind of mental illness. The mad, he wrote, in effect, the idiots and those who pretend to be insane because there's reason to believe there are many fakers, are surrounded by popular veneration. French doctors in Morocco were repelled by sainthood. The first director of the French Protectorate Health Service wrote of the prayer of Sufi orders as pathology, delirium, and contagion. He wrote in 1913, "These exhibitions disgust me profoundly, and I flee them. I accuse them of perpetuating fanaticism and ignorance, of capturing the soul of the people, preventing them from thinking, which drags them down to the worst kind of servitude. French doctors pathologized Islamic mystical phenomena as hysteria, neurosis, and madness, and the jinn-possessed Majnun became an ethno-psychiatric type in the insane asylums of Dr. Antoine Poirot, founder of the Algiers School of North African Psychiatry. So if we return to Morocco on the eve of colonial conquest, we find the Moroccan Sultan, not the French, introduced positivism to Moroccan politics. The Moroccan sultans were in a bad position by the end of the 19th century. Morocco was defeated in the 1844 war with France and the 1860 war with Spain. Sultan Moulay Hassan recognized that Morocco needed European technology and science and sent students to study artillery in Belgium, England, France, and Spain, and accepted European training missions for his military. The Sultan knew that these Europeans were spies, but he needed European science. So he played the European powers off of each other and separated individuals for integration to his army, like the medical doctor Fernand Linares. But unfortunately, Moulay Hassan died in 1894, and his young successor, Abdelaziz, was no match for the Europeans. After 1900, the Moroccan state went 100 million francs into debt. When the Sultan requested a fatwa on the cause of our present decadence, the scholars spoke with one voice. The foreigners are the original cause of our misfortunes. It is to them that our decadence, our anarchy, our internal strife, the loss of our independence, and our ruin must be imputed. Of what utility are they? What new sciences have they brought us? A similar situation in Ottoman Egypt had caused a crisis and a self-conscious quest for Islamic modernity. The two fathers of Islamic modernism developed their ideas in dialogue with French positivism, Jamal ad-Din al-Afghani through public debate with Ernst Renan, and the jurist Muhammad Abdu, who attempted a grand synthesis between Republican law and Islamic law. But I argue that Islamic modernizers unintentionally absorbed a positivist epistemological frame that did not allow for the existence of saintly knowing. The Moroccan sultans used this Islamic modernist thought, this Salafiyya, to discredit saints, rivals for political power. In Morocco, the young Sultan Abdelaziz was challenged by saint-led rural revolt and unable to repel French invasion. In 1907, the ulama declared him to be morally deceased, and the people broke their oath of allegiance to him. His scheming brother Abdul Hafiz seized the throne and attacked sainthood himself, closing the Sufi lodges of the Kattani order, imprisoning the disciples, and having a prominent saint, Muhammad ibn Abdul Kabir al-Kattani, convicted of heresy, beaten to death, and his dead body dumped into an unmarked grave. The Sultan asserted his power through the body. He had al-Kattani's disciples' hands cut off and the bloody stumps rubbed with salt so they could survive as testimony to the supremacy of his law. The Moroccan body belonged to him and not to God. But the people rejected Abdul Hafiz in a series of revolts, and in 1912, surrounded by hostile tribes in the city of Fez, Sultan Abdul Hafiz called on France to liberate him. The Sultan signed away Moroccan independence in the Treaty of 1912, a protectorate agreement that located sovereignty in the person of the Sultan, which is repeatedly reaffirmed every time Lyautey writes. Again, we, France, protect the sovereignty of Morocco in the person of the Sultan, the sovereignty of His Majesty and his estate, etc. But political saints also failed Morocco. Saints led a series of failed messianic revolts against the French, and Sufi orders cooperated with French authorities. Islamic modernism became the only viable language of resistance, modernity, and nationalism in Morocco. The French sought to colonize Morocco through the body. We can trace the rise of the modern state through public health and medicine. Colonialism, whether French or British, governed through biopolitics, the technological, urban, legal, epistemological, and state mechanisms for disciplining the body, improving the family, creating rational workers, inventing political subjects, and managing the population as a biological species. Colonial public health is the story of labor, of environment, municipal governance, gender, policy, law, and the welfare state. Medicine and law define the citizen, his birth, life, and death, the ontological sources of his political rights. Public health is the manifestation of the social contract between the citizen and the polity. But colonialism wasn't true public health because colonialism deforms the public of health. A state, not a republic, provides medicine to a patient, not a citizen. In practice, colonial public health was often a tool of invasion, a race-based provision of hospitals, quarantine for natives but not for French people, an appropriation of waqf for public welfare, and the reallocation of resources to European settlers and investors. The visible inequity of colonial health and the suffering of the colonized body became the rallying cry for nationalists across the Middle East. Morocco is a land of two weights and two measures, wrote the National Bloc in 1934. And France has failed to provide the hospitals and science they promised in the Protectorate Agreement. Even as the Moroccan nationalists criticized French colonialism, they had internalized its terms of modernity: positive science, popular sovereignty, nationalism, and biomedicine. The Moroccan nationalists demanded biomedicine as a citizen's right, proposed a new European-style university for Moroccans in the modern sciences, and waged a campaign against so-called heretical Sufi practices. Jurists of the Qarawiyyin University petitioned the Sultan to outlaw celebrations of the saints. Nationalist newspapers applauded the prohibition of the contemptible Aisawa and other brotherhoods and their barbaric, savage practices, and called saint healing women's superstition and public stupidity. Nationalist El-Wazani was horrified that European filmmakers recorded Aisawa Sufis as if it were the present style in our country and defined the evolutionary stage of our people. He protested, rather, one should show the other Morocco, the modern Morocco of a new generation. As Moroccan modernizers digested French positivism, a Sufi polity and an articulate body became inaccessible, impossible to imagine. Body and mind are separated in the liberal citizenship of North Africa and the Middle East. And Morocco was among the last countries of the Middle East and North Africa to embrace parliamentary government and Salafiyya. There were constitutional revolutions in Egypt, 1919, Turkey, 1909, Iran, 1905, but the extreme social and economic inequities of liberalism and neocolonialism produced a backlash, first with a turn to Marxism in the 1950s, with the Arab socialist regimes of Jamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt and Habib Bourguiba in Tunisia, and secondly, with the rise of political Islam and Islamist groups like the Muslim Brothers. If we consider as diverse a group as the Islamic philosopher Ali Shariati in Iran, or Sayyid Qutb in Egypt, or even Sheikh Yassin in Morocco, we find an effort in Islamic philosophy to reintegrate the body to the political subject and to the polity. Here is the true appeal of the Muslim Brothers. Consider the writings of Sayyid Qutb of Egypt. How Qutb attempted in his social justice in Islam to reintegrate the citizen as a body with the body politic. We have discovered that the nature of Islamic belief about human life makes social justice essentially an all-embracing justice, which does not take account merely of material and economic factors. For Islam does not divide the individual into body and soul, into differing intellectual and spiritual sides. It holds that the values of this life are material and spiritual at one and the same time, and that no division is possible in such a unity. It holds also that mankind is essentially one body, its members mutually responsible and interdependent, a body in which there are no clashing and contradictory groups. So by way of conclusion, let's return to our original premise, that the body is the base of the body politic. The body is the precondition of sovereignty. If we begin with this premise, how does a history of healing in Morocco illuminate the contemporary politics of the Arab Spring and its aftermath? First, we see that modern liberal citizenship, which separates body and mind, fails to encapsulate the human being. Political systems that negate the biological survival of their citizens are in crisis. And protest was both in and through the citizen's body. By setting fire to himself, Muhammad Bouazizi asserted the illegitimacy of the Ben Ali regime and showed citizenship as embodied. His self-immolation said that the physical survival of the citizen is the fundamental basis of the social contract. And secondly, the Muslim body remains a space where politics and sovereignty are imagined and debated. So this is something that you see periodically, several times, in fact, from Afghanistan. The example of this news report. So Al-Qaeda gravesite becomes a shrine. Buried here in a corner of the vast and desolate Kandahar cemetery are the Al-Qaeda dead, 70 fighters who were killed together in a coalition airstrike in 2001. Yesterday, a van crammed with Afghan men came to a gravel spinning stop at the Al-Qaeda plot. Carefully, they removed a lame relative from the vehicle and carried him to the edge of the grave so he could dip his finger in the salt. The crones, who hang about the cemetery, swear to reporters that they have witnessed instant cures. Some days the crowds are considerable: childless women seeking fruit of the womb, invalids, fathers of mentally disabled boys. They turn to these moldering bones of fallen jihadists as though the place were Lourdes. The nation state is clearly in crisis in several parts of the Islamic world for different reasons, but explanations that resort to tribalism are unsatisfactory. Take, for example, the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. The weakness of the state is still measured in election turnout, numbers of recruits for the army, but to understand political legitimacy, consider that shortly after September 11, 2001, a Philadelphia Inquirer reporter found that residents of Kabul were walking outside the city to touch the graves of al-Qaeda fighters. So several years before this is 6 years later. When the reporter asked a mechanic why he did this, the man replied, "Because I heard it cured sickness, and because this government is illegitimate. It was set up by the Americans." These corporeal phenomena are usually marginalized or ignored as irrational, unmodern, or embarrassing, but I argue that we should look more closely. Healing reveals deeper political realities. In Afghanistan, we are seeing how ordinary people imagine and participate in the body politic, in and through the body. Thus, my third and central point is that we need to study emerging polities through the lens of corporeality and corporeal expression. And if we do, what becomes visible? How does this shift in our frame of vision? How does this shift our frame of vision? The Arab Spring shows us a dialogue between the citizen and the polity, in and through the body. We have seen multiple struggles in Egypt over women's bodies in the public. The inclusion or forced exclusion of women from public space, arguments made that women don't belong in Tahrir Square and thus not in the body politic, and can't be protected from sexual attack and rape. Women respond with corporeal politics. To protest the decreased rights for women in the Egyptian constitution, they insist on demonstrating in Tahrir Square where they collectively and publicly cut their hair. Tunisian and Egyptian members of the controversial international Femen movement use their naked bodies as a writing surface for slogans affirming the secular republic and protesting Sharia applied to women's status, an assertion of political voice through the body. These are debates about citizenship and subjectivity. What is the citizen? What are his rights? And how is the polity to be constituted through the law? As for the Qutb Sidi Ahmed Zarruq al-Fassi, the saint in Libya whose body was disinterred and stolen from his graves, the destruction of Sufi shrines, graves, and manuscripts is an act one and the same, an effort to erase alternate Islamic knowledge and to impose a hegemonic idea of truth, reality, and the past. Corporeality gives us an important lens through which to understand the nature of sovereignty and the debate over its terms. We need to see biopolitics not as inscribing control on the body, but as a dialogue between the citizen and the polity in the body, to see the body as a forum for discourse and the seat of subjectivity. Thank you.